you would have been 18, but it was the Hawke period and Hawke-Keating period, and then became the Keating period. But it was a period of extraordinarily high interest rates, big inflation,
yes,
big government spending,
yes,
from mid 80s to late 80s, and into the early 90s. It was the recession we had to have,
correct,
according to Paul Keating, and but I mean it was, and there was a bit of a housing problem in that house prices, or people with homes were paying somewhere between 18% and 20% interest. And a lot of people had to sell their houses, me being one of them,
yes,
and with families. And I'll never forget that period in my life. And whilst I think Paul Keating did a lot of great things, particularly superannuation, all that sort of stuff, I also take the view that that government, that administration, overspent. And that's a conversation that's being held in the United States right now. And that's a Trump conversation, pretty radical conversation there, especially with the way Musk is coming into the whole deal, and they're going to cut government spending. But it is a conversation now in Australia. Overspending can cause inflation, irrespective of how much Dr. Jim dances around it.
Yeah. And
I don't want to get too heavy on the politics because there's an interview about you. But what do you think about that when you think back to the late 80s and 90s? Do you think this is all happening again?
I do. There's sort of an eerie, deja vu for me when you think about that period, the late 80s, early 90s, and the period now. The Reserve Bank governor, I think, has done a great job. She's maintained her independence. She's stoic, and she has been guided not by the politics or the pressure that she feels from the Treasurer, but by her training. And she's been brought up in a model where they have an independence. And, we may not always agree with the Reserve Bank governor, and the comments sometimes seem a bit insincere or whatever over the years. But I think Michelle Bullock has really switched the light on for a lot of Australians when she's making a statement of the obvious that if the government continues to spend like they have, they've spent an extra, $347 billion, something of that nature. That is a lot of money to pump into the economy, which does fuel inflation and keeps interest rates high. I also think the energy debate as well, I think we sort of sometimes brush over this and people see the increases in their electricity bills and their gas bills. But the fact is that feeds into inflation as well, to grocery and food prices, because cold storage is more expensive, because it's high energy use, et cetera, fertilisers, and all of that ultimately is passed on in grocery prices. So I do think it's a debate again. The thing that's different in my mind today that stands out most is that you've had asset price inflation, so people's homes have gone up dramatically in value if they owned a home before COVID. And they've got equity there now, whereas in the 80s and 90s they didn't have that equity, I don't think. And I don't think there was the buyers, the demand for the product then that there is now, that if your house price has gone up and you've got $1 million of equity, you're in default interest, the bank probably would have sold you up pretty quickly.
In the 80s and 90s.
In the 80s.
100%.
And probably at a fire sale price. And you probably ended up with a debt walking away from it, or, bugger all net position. Whereas now I think the bank's probably, because of the publicity, more loath to sell people up. But also they're earning default interest knowing that there's $1 million of equity and there's probably 10 buyers lined up at an auction to buy the place.
So there's very little risk.
So there's no great rush to sell it. And that has a different psychological effect, because if you're walking away with nothing or with debt from a house sale, then that's a dark cloud. If you're walking away with $1 million, you may not be able to buy the house that you want, or maybe you end up compromising and buying a cheaper house, or if you've got $100,000 equity, whatever the numbers are, it's a different psychological equation today than it was then. Now, maybe house prices are contracting, and maybe people have paid over odds over the last couple of years, and they're going to find themselves in a negative equity position. But there's still, sort of a supply drought, so there's still demand for housing, which will probably balance the equation out, I would have thought. So, but yes, I mean, that was the dynamic back then.
That's for a budding Prime Minister. That's very interesting to see such a full analysis I mean, that's my game. And I'm sitting here talking to a PM who's got to be across a whole lot of things if he becomes PM, not just economics or the Australian economy. But that's a pretty articulated analysis of what's going on right now. I probably couldn't have got a better analysis from Stephen Koukoulas, who, by the way, is a Labor guy. He's my economist guy that hangs out with me. He was Julia Gillard's chief economist. Koukoulas would do exactly the same analysis as that. In fact, I've had the conversations with him about exactly that. How the hell do you become? How did you become so? I don't know. How did you know this stuff? I mean, our Prime Minister was asked about the cash rate prior to the previous election. He didn't even know it.
I just think,
how do you know about this stuff?
I just think it's the influences that you've had in your life and your experiences and what you bring to the table. And I've always had an interest in property, and I've renovated a few places and sold them. I've split a couple of 32 perch blocks, which was the thing to do years ago.
32 perch, how big's that?
It's 809 square metres.
Right.
So in those days, if you had a 20-metre frontage, you could split it into two blocks.
Subdivided.
10 subdivided, yeah. And so look, I've had that interest in property. I was probably geeky kid reading the Fin Review at a pretty early age, and my 20-year-old who is interested in sort of current affairs and the sort of the world, I suppose, but I never see him reading a newspaper, never watches the news, and obviously gets a lot of social media feed, which is fine. But I bought him an AFR subscription, and I said, mate, you've got to start reading the AFR and get a sense. And in those days, I don't know, they probably still sell it, but I used to buy like the Money magazine or Home. Maybe you probably contributed to it back in the day and wrote articles. I'm not sure, but so yeah, I think I've had that interest in particularly housing, and I think also that the home is such an important anchor for a stable relationship, for raising of children, an asset that increases in value that you can bequeath to your children or that can set you up in retirement. And it's also the underpinning of small business, because most of the lending is against, secured against a home. So for me, that home ownership is really essential to the Australian culture and psyche. And I think it really upsets me that a lot of younger people now have lost the belief that they'll ever own a home and they'll be lifetime renters. And I just think that's, a tragedy.
It's because most people just see you as Peter Dutton, former policeman, and a minister for various portfolios. And all of a sudden, Peter Dutton just give me an analysis, an economic analysis, which I probably couldn't put any better myself, and that's what I've spent my whole life doing. So I guess it's apart from you saying you're interested in it, it's something you do an analysis on. It's not just because you want to be the Prime Minister. It's probably, am I getting it? Am I correct? I mean, I think you genuinely are interested in this stuff.
Yeah, very much, very much.
And if I could take it beyond the economics of it, are you genuinely interested in this stuff because what it represents to the fabric of being Australian?
Yes. And I'll again, back to the earlier point we discussed, I mean, the influences, I think, shape who you are and your attitudes, obviously, good and bad. And for me, it's been a tool of wealth creation and opportunity for Kiralee and I and for our children. And I think my kids who are 22, 20 and 19 have that aspiration. They're saving like crazy to try and buy a house because I think we've instilled that in them, that it's it's an aspiration that you should strive for, and there's good that comes from it. And if you sacrifice and you save and you go without, then there's sort of a longer term opportunity and upside. So, for me, for a kid who came from working class suburb, property was an opportunity to to try and move to the next stage, or to have an opportunity to move beyond that. And I really think it's sad that, as I say, that opportunity might be not available to a generation of young Australians, and renting and for some people there's no choice, and I respect that, but I just think if we can provide that financial stability and security, then it's better for relationship stability, and better for family, and therefore better for society and the country as well. So I think there are a few elements to the whole housing picture, and how significant a part of our culture that is.